State licensing and regulation in the electrical industry have been debated for many years. Supporters argue that licensing ensures public safety and promotes professionalism, while opponents cite potential cost increases and stifled competition. Many electricians and industry professionals support licensing as a necessary measure to protect consumers from unqualified or unsafe practices, believing it will improve electrical work quality and reduce accidents and injuries. Some businesses and contractors argue that licensing will create barriers for new businesses and increase consumer costs. They also worry about potential shortages of qualified electricians. Others have mixed opinions, believing licensing may have some benefits but could be implemented in a way that minimizes negative impacts. The implementation and effects of electrical licensing vary from state to state. Some states have stringent licensing requirements, while others have more relaxed rules. In some states, licensing has been credited with improving electrical work quality, reducing accidents, and protecting consumers. In other states, licensing has been blamed for increased costs, decreased competition, and a shortage of qualified electricians. Indiana State Bill 1498 recently passed into law establishes licensing requirements for electricians in the state. Firstly, it creates a new electrical licensing board to administer the licensing program. Secondly, it requires all electricians to be licensed, including journeymen, contractors, and inspectors. Thirdly, it establishes different license levels based on experience and qualifications. Fourthly, it sets standards for continuing education and professional development. The potential impacts of Indiana State Bill 1498 are unclear at this time. It is too early to determine whether the bill will have positive or negative effects on the electrical industry in Indiana. However, it is likely that the bill will lead to increased oversight and regulation of the electrical trade in the state. Licensing is only one factor that can affect the quality and safety of electrical work. Other factors, such as education, training, and ethical practices, also play a role. Therefore, it is important for consumers to do their research and hire qualified and reputable electricians, regardless of whether or not licensing is required in their state. Let's delve deeper into the specific aspects of electrical licensing and its potential effects. When considering the implementation of licensing requirements, it is crucial to address several key areas. Firstly, the definition of electrical work needs to be clearly and precisely defined in the licensing legislation. This definition should encompass all activities that involve the installation, maintenance, repair, and alteration of electrical systems and equipment. It should also specify the voltage levels and types of installations that fall under the scope of the licensing requirements. Secondly, the licensing requirements should establish different categories of licenses based on the scope of work and the level of experience and qualifications. These categories may include apprentice electrician, journeyman electrician, master electrician, and electrical contractor. Each category should have specific requirements for education, training, and examination. Thirdly, the licensing requirements should include provisions for reciprocity with other states. This means that electricians who are licensed in other states should be able to obtain a license in the state without having to meet all of the original licensing requirements. Reciprocity can help to ensure that there is an adequate supply of qualified electricians in the state. Fourthly, the licensing requirements should establish a process for investigating and resolving complaints against licensed electricians. This process should include provisions for disciplinary action, such as suspension or revocation of a license in cases of negligence, incompetence, or violation of ethical standards. Fifthly, the licensing requirement should include provisions for continuing education and professional development. This will help to ensure that licensed electricians stay up to date on the latest technologies and best practices. The continuing education requirements should be specific to the type of license held and should cover topics such as the National Electrical Code, safety standards, and new technologies. Let's consider the potential positive impacts of electrical licensing. One of the primary benefits of electrical licensing is improved public safety. By ensuring that only qualified and trained individuals perform electrical work, licensing can help to reduce the risk of electrical accidents and injuries. Licensed electricians are required to meet certain standards of competency and to adhere to safety regulations which can help to prevent fires, electrocutions, and other hazards. Another positive impact of electrical licensing is increased professionalism within the electrical trade. Licensing can help to raise the standards of the profession and to promote ethical practices. Licensed electricians are held accountable for their work and are subject to disciplinary action if they violate ethical standards or engage in negligent or incompetent practices. Licensing can also help to improve the reputation of the electrical trade and to attract more qualified individuals to the profession. Licensing can also lead to improved quality of electrical work. Licensed electricians are required to meet certain standards of competency and to stay up to date on the latest technologies and best practices. This can help to ensure that electrical work is performed correctly and safely, and that it meets the requirements of the National Electrical Code and other applicable standards. Improved quality of electrical work can lead to reduced energy consumption, lower maintenance costs, and increased reliability of electrical systems. Let's also examine the potential negative impacts of electrical licensing. One potential negative impact of electrical licensing is increased costs for consumers. Licensing can increase the cost of electrical work by reducing the supply of qualified electricians and by adding administrative costs associated with the licensing program. These increased costs can be passed on to consumers in the form of higher prices for electrical services. Another potential negative impact of electrical licensing is decreased competition within the electrical trade. Licensing can create a barrier to entry for new businesses and can make it more difficult for smaller contractors to compete with larger, established firms. This can lead to reduced competition and higher prices for consumers. Licensing can also lead to a shortage of qualified electricians, particularly in rural areas or in areas with high demand for electrical services. If the licensing requirements are too stringent or if the supply of qualified electricians is limited, it can be difficult for consumers to find qualified electricians to perform electrical work. This can lead to delays in construction projects and increased costs for consumers. It is important to consider the experiences of other states with electrical licensing when evaluating the potential impacts of Indiana State Bill 1498. Some states have had positive experiences with electrical licensing, while others have had negative experiences. By studying the experiences of other states, policymakers in Indiana can learn from the successes and failures of other licensing programs and can make informed decisions about the implementation of Indiana State Bill 1498. Some states have implemented electrical licensing programs that have been credited with improving public safety, increasing professionalism within the electrical trade, and improving the quality of electrical work. These programs typically have stringent licensing requirements, effective enforcement mechanisms, and ongoing professional development opportunities for licensed electricians. Other states have implemented electrical licensing programs that have been criticized for increasing costs, decreasing competition, and creating the shortage of qualified electricians. These programs typically have overly burdensome licensing requirements, ineffective enforcement mechanisms, and limited opportunities for professional development. Let's discuss the key provisions of Indiana State Bill 1498. The bill creates a new electrical licensing board to administer the licensing program. The board is responsible for developing and implementing licensing requirements, investigating complaints against licensed electricians, and taking disciplinary action against those who violate ethical standards or engage in negligent or incompetent practices. The bill requires all electricians to be licensed, including journeymen, contractors, and inspectors. This means that anyone who performs electrical work in Indiana must obtain a license from the Electrical Licensing Board. The bill establishes different levels of licenses based on experience and qualifications. This allows the board to tailor the licensing requirements to the specific type of electrical work that an electrician performs. The bill sets standards for continuing education and professional development. This ensures that licensed electricians stay up to date on the latest technologies and best practices. The continuing education requirements are specific to the type of license held and cover topics such as the National Electrical Code, safety standards, and new technologies. The potential impacts of Indiana State Bill 1498 are difficult to predict at this time. However, it is likely that the bill will lead to increased oversight and regulation of the electrical trade in Indiana. This could have both positive and negative impacts on the electrical industry and on consumers. On the positive side, increased oversight and regulation could lead to improved public safety, increased professionalism within the electrical trade, and improved quality of electrical work. On the negative side, increased oversight and regulation could lead to increased costs for consumers, decreased competition within the electrical trade, and a shortage of qualified electricians. Ultimately, the success of Indiana State Bill 1498 will depend on how effectively the Electrical Licensing Board implements and enforces the licensing requirements. If the board is able to develop and implement licensing requirements that are fair, reasonable, and effective, the bill could have a positive impact on the electrical industry in Indiana. However, if the board is unable to do so, the bill could have negative consequences for the electrical industry and for consumers. It is important to remember that licensing is only one factor that can affect the quality and safety of electrical work. Other factors such as education, training, and ethical practices also play a role. Therefore, it is important for consumers to do their research and hire qualified and reputable electricians, regardless of whether or not licensing is required in their state. When choosing an electrician, consumers should ask for references, check the electrician's license status, and verify that the electrician is insured. Consumers should also be wary of electricians who offer unusually low prices, as this could be a sign of substandard work. In conclusion, Indiana State Bill 1498 has the potential to have a significant impact on the electrical industry in Indiana. However, the ultimate success of the bill will depend on how effectively it is implemented and enforced. Consumers should continue to do their research and hire qualified and reputable electricians, regardless of whether or not licensing is required in their state. The implementation of Indiana State Bill 1498 involves several crucial steps to ensure its effectiveness and fairness. Firstly, the Electrical Licensing Board needs to establish clear and transparent procedures for applying for and renewing licenses. This includes defining the required documentation, such as proof of education, training, and experience, as well as setting reasonable fees for licenses and renewals. Secondly, the board needs to develop comprehensive examinations to assess the competency of applicants for different license categories. These examinations should cover a wide range of electrical knowledge and skills, including the National Electrical Code, safety regulations, and practical application of electrical principles. Thirdly, the board needs to establish a system for tracking and verifying the continuing education credits earned by licensed electricians. This system should ensure that licensed electricians are meeting the required continuing education IOs and that the courses they are taking are relevant to their field of practice. Fourthly, the board needs to develop and implement effective enforcement mechanisms to address violations of the licensing requirements. This includes investigating complaints against licensed electricians, conducting inspections of electrical work, and taking disciplinary action against those who violate ethical standards or engage in negligent or incompetent practices. Fifthly, the board needs to engage in ongoing communication and outreach to stakeholders, including electricians, contractors, consumers, and other interested parties. This will help to ensure that everyone is aware of the licensing requirements and that they have the opportunity to provide feedback on the implementation of the bill. Another important aspect of Indiana State Bill 1498 is its impact on the electrical apprenticeship system. The bill should include provisions to ensure that apprentices receive adequate training and supervision and that they are able to progress through the apprenticeship program in a timely manner. This may involve establishing standards for apprenticeship programs, providing financial assistance to apprentices, and creating incentives for employers to hire apprentices. The bill should also address the issue of unlicensed electrical work. Unlicensed electrical work can pose a serious threat to public safety, as it is often performed by individuals who lack the necessary training and experience. The bill should include provisions to deter unlicensed electrical work, such as fines, penalties, and injunctions. The bill should also empower local building inspectors to identify and report unlicensed electrical work. In addition to the specific provisions of Indiana State Bill 1498, there are several other factors that can affect the quality and safety of electrical work in Indiana. These factors include the availability of qualified instructors, the quality of electrical training programs, and the level of enforcement of building codes. Policymakers in Indiana should consider these factors when evaluating the potential impacts of Indiana State Bill 1498 and when developing strategies to improve the quality and safety of electrical work in the state. For example, the state could invest in improving the quality of electrical training programs, increasing the number of qualified instructors, and strengthening the enforcement of building codes. The state could also provide financial assistance to students who are pursuing careers in the electrical trade. Ultimately, the goal of Indiana State Bill 1498 should be to protect the public from the hazards of unsafe electrical work. By ensuring that only qualified and trained individuals perform electrical work, the bill can help to reduce the risk of electrical accidents and injuries. The bill can also help to improve the quality of electrical work and to promote ethical practices within the electrical trade. To achieve these goals, it is essential that the bill is implemented and enforced effectively and that it is supported by ongoing communication and outreach to stakeholders. Furthermore, it is important to recognize that electrical technology and practices are constantly evolving. Therefore, the Electrical Licensing Board should regularly review and update the licensing requirements to ensure that they are current and relevant. This may involve incorporating new technologies, such as smart grids and renewable energy systems, into the licensing curriculum. It may also involve adopting new safety standards and best practices. Another consideration is the impact of Indiana State Bill 1498 on small businesses. Small electrical contractors may face challenges in complying with the new licensing requirements, particularly if they lack the resources to invest in continuing education and professional development. To mitigate these challenges, the state could provide financial assistance to small businesses to help them comply with the licensing requirements. The state could also offer free or low-cost training programs to help small business owners and their employees stay up to date on the latest technologies and best practices. In addition, the Electrical Licensing Board should work to streamline the licensing process and to reduce the administrative burden on small businesses. This may involve developing online application and renewal systems and providing clear and concise guidance on the licensing requirements. Another area to consider is the impact of Indiana State Bill 1498 on rural communities. Rural communities may face challenges in attracting and retaining qualified electricians, particularly if the licensing requirements are too stringent. To address this issue, the state could offer incentives to electricians to practice in rural areas. The state could also provide financial assistance to rural communities to help them attract and retain qualified electricians. In addition, the Electrical Licensing Board should work to ensure that the licensing requirements are not overly burdensome for electricians who practice in rural areas. This may involve allowing electricians to meet the continuing education requirements through online courses or other alternative methods. Finally, it is important to monitor the impacts of Indiana State Bill 1498 over time. The Electrical Licensing Board should collect data on the number of licensed electricians, the number of complaints filed against licensed electricians, and the number of electrical accidents and injuries. This data can be used to evaluate the effectiveness of the licensing program and to identify areas for improvement. The board should also conduct periodic surveys of electricians, contractors, and consumers to gather feedback on the licensing program. This feedback can be used to make adjustments to the licensing requirements and to improve the overall quality and safety of electrical work in Indiana. By carefully considering these factors and by engaging in ongoing communication and outreach to stakeholders, policymakers in Indiana can ensure that Indiana State Bill 1498 is implemented effectively and that it achieves its goal of protecting the public from the hazards of unsafe electrical work. Furthermore, the specifics of the continuing education requirements established by the Electrical Licensing Board will be critical. The board needs to ensure that the continuing education courses are relevant to the practical work performed by electricians and that they cover the latest advancements in electrical technology and safety practices. The board should also consider offering a variety of continuing education options, including in-person classes, online courses, and workshops to accommodate the diverse needs of licensed electricians. The enforcement of Indiana State Bill 1498 will also be crucial to its success. The Electrical Licensing Board needs to have the resources and authority to investigate complaints against licensed electricians, conduct inspections of electrical work, and take disciplinary action against those who violate the licensing requirements. The board should also work closely with local building inspectors to identify and address unlicensed electrical work. The board should also establish a clear and transparent process for handling complaints against licensed electricians. This process should include provisions for investigating complaints, conducting hearings, and issuing disciplinary orders. The board should also make information about disciplinary actions taken against licensed electricians available to the public. Another important aspect of Indiana State Bill 1498 is its impact on the electrical industry's workforce. The bill could potentially lead to a shortage of qualified electricians, particularly in certain areas of the state. To address this issue, the state should invest in programs to train and recruit new electricians. This may involve providing scholarships and grants to students who are pursuing careers in the electrical trade, as well as promoting the electrical trade as a viable career option to young people. The state could also partner with community colleges and technical schools to develop and offer high-quality electrical training programs. In addition, the Electrical Licensing Board should work to streamline the licensing process and to reduce the barriers to entry for qualified electricians. This may involve recognizing licenses from other states, as well as offering alternative pathways to licensure for individuals who have relevant experience or training. Another consideration is the impact of Indiana State Bill 1498 on the cost of housing and construction. The bill could potentially increase the cost of electrical work, which could in turn increase the cost of housing and construction. To mitigate this impact, the state should work to control the costs associated with licensing and enforcement. The state should also encourage competition among electrical contractors to help keep prices down. In addition, the Electrical Licensing Board should work to ensure that the licensing requirements are not overly burdensome or complex, which could increase the cost of electrical work. The board should also provide clear and concise guidance on the licensing requirements to help electricians comply with the law. It is also important to consider the impact of Indiana State Bill 1498 on innovation in the electrical industry. The bill could potentially stifle innovation by creating barriers to entry for new businesses and technologies. To mitigate this impact, the state should work to create a regulatory environment that is conducive to innovation. The state should also encourage collaboration between the electrical industry, academia, and government to promote the development of new technologies and practices. In addition, the Electrical Licensing Board should be open to considering new approaches to electrical work and should not be afraid to adapt the licensing requirements as needed. Finally, it is important to remember that Indiana State Bill 1498 is just one piece of the puzzle when it comes to ensuring the safety and quality of electrical work in Indiana. Other factors, such as building codes, inspections, and consumer education, also play a crucial role. The state should work to strengthen these other components of the electrical safety system to provide comprehensive protection for the public. The state should also invest in programs to educate consumers about the importance of hiring licensed electricians and about the risks of unlicensed electrical work. By taking a comprehensive approach to electrical safety, Indiana can create a safer and more prosperous environment for its residents. The specifics of how the Electrical Licensing Board handles complaints and disciplinary actions against licensed electricians will significantly impact the effectiveness and fairness of the licensing program. A transparent, impartial, and efficient complaint process is essential for maintaining public trust and ensuring that licensed electricians are held accountable for their actions. The board should establish clear guidelines for filing complaints, investigating allegations, and conducting hearings. The guidelines should also outline the potential penalties for violating the licensing requirements, which could range from warnings and fines to suspension or revocation of the license. The board should also consider implementing alternative dispute resolution mechanisms, such as mediation or arbitration, to resolve complaints more quickly and efficiently. These mechanisms can often help to resolve disputes without the need for formal disciplinary proceedings. Another important consideration is the composition of the Electrical Licensing Board. The board should include representatives from a variety of stakeholders, including licensed electricians, electrical contractors, consumers, and government agencies. This will help to ensure that the board's decisions are informed by a diverse range of perspectives. The board should also be transparent in its operations and should make its meeting agendas, minutes, and decisions available to the public. This will help to build public trust and confidence in the licensing program. The Electrical Licensing Board should also work to develop and maintain strong relationships with other state agencies, such as the Department of Fire and Building Services and the Department of Labor. These relationships can help to facilitate communication and coordination on electrical safety issues. The board should also work with local building inspectors to identify and address unlicensed electrical work. Local building inspectors are often the first line of defense against unlicensed electrical work, and they can play a crucial role in protecting the public from the hazards of unsafe electrical installations. In addition to the above considerations, it is also important to remember that the electrical industry is constantly evolving. New technologies, materials, and practices are constantly being developed. The Electrical Licensing Board should stay abreast of these developments and should adapt the licensing requirements as needed to ensure that they remain relevant and effective. The board should also consult with industry experts and stakeholders to gather feedback on the licensing requirements and to identify areas for improvement. By taking a proactive and collaborative approach to electrical safety, Indiana can create a safer and more prosperous environment for its residents. In conclusion, the successful implementation of Indiana State Bill 1498 requires a comprehensive and well-planned approach that addresses a variety of issues. By carefully considering these issues and by engaging in ongoing communication and outreach to stakeholders, policymakers in Indiana can ensure that the bill achieves its goal of protecting the public from the hazards of unsafe electrical work. The emphasis should be on striking a balance between ensuring public safety and avoiding unnecessary burdens on qualified electricians and electrical contractors.